The north wind howled, the cold pierced to the bone. It was the severe winter of the 23rd year of Qianlong in Hebei Baoding Prefecture. The streets were sparsely populated, with scattered carriages and horses hurrying by. Apart from the businessmen striving for a living and the hurried travelers, few people were willing to go out in this icy and snowy weather. As the sky gradually darkened, the shops on the street also began to prepare to close. At this moment, a Confucian scholar appeared, leading a thin horse slowly walking from the east side of the street. The scholar was about 25 or 26 years old, dressed in a blue shirt and padded jacket, with a leisurely demeanor and a hint of weariness on his face, seemingly due to the long journey. He kept asking passers-by for the address of Zhou Fugui. The name Zhou Fugui was well known in Baoding Prefecture. The Zhou family was a prominent household in Baoding, with 3 generations engaged in the business of selling cloth. By the time Zhou Fugui inherited the family business, they were already wealthy, with a large number of servants and family members, making them one of the wealthiest families in Baoding Prefecture. He supplied goods to the cloth markets within hundreds of miles, and his wealth was constantly growing. Because of his wealth, he was also highly favored in the prefecture. Even officials would treat him with great respect. In theory, the address of the Zhou family should be well known to all, but when the scholar asked several people, their expressions changed upon hearing the name Zhou Fugui. They either shook their heads in ignorance or hurriedly left, leaving the scholar feeling very puzzled. Could it be that in this Baoding prefecture, no one actually knew the residence of this wealthy man? I see a small noodle shop ahead, and an elderly man with graying hair is preparing to close the door. The scholar hurried a few steps to the front of the shop and bowed to the old man, saying, "Excuse me, sir, could you tell me where Zhou Fugui lives?" The old man, upon hearing the question, slowly raised his head to size up the scholar, then said, "Sir, you look quite travel-worn, you must be from out of town. May I ask what business you have with the Zhou family?" The scholar found this question somewhat strange, thinking to himself, "What does it have to do with you that I'm looking for the Zhou family?" However, he couldn't just ignore the old man's question, so he replied, "I am a distant relative of his, passing through this area and wishing to pay a visit. I hope you can point me in the right direction, sir." The old man furrowed his brow, looked at him for a moment, and then said, "Go along this road for a few hundred steps, turn right at the corner, and you will see a large courtyard with a white lantern hanging at the entrance." The scholar was both pleased and puzzled upon hearing this. He was pleased to finally know the address of the Zhou family, but puzzled because as the new year approached, every household would hang red lanterns, so where would one find a white lantern? He quickly thanked the old man, turned to leave, and suddenly heard the old man muttering behind him, "The poor have no one asking in the bustling market, while the rich have distant relatives in the deep mountains. But I'm afraid this relative might not be easy to deal with." The scholar was greatly surprised upon hearing this, and was about to ask, but he saw the old man had already turned and gone back into the shop, firmly closing the door. The scholar stood outside the shop for a moment, shaking his head, truly not understanding the old man's words. Fortunately, he had already learned the address of the Zhou family, so he followed the old man's directions and turned to the right. Before long, he indeed saw a large manor by the roadside, surrounded by weeping willows, with imposing white walls and black gates, and sure enough, there were 2 white lanterns hanging at the entrance of the manor. Without much thought, the scholar quickly tied up his horse, approached the door, and lightly knocked a few times. Soon, a servant in white clothes opened the door. Without much questioning, the scholar said directly to him, "Please announce that Li Wenhai is here to visit the master." After sizing him up, the servant turned and went inside. A moment later, a middle-aged man in plain clothes came out and, upon seeing the scholar, immediately took his hand and said with a smile, "Wenhai, my dear brother, it's been many years, I've missed you so much." It turned out that this middle-aged man was none other than Zhou Fugui, the master of the Zhou family, and the scholar outside, Li Wenhai, was his cousin. The two had grown up playing together, but at the age of 8, Li Wenhai moved with his parents to Hebei, and they rarely met afterwards. Over the past decade, although Zhou Fugui had visited him many times in Hebei, Li Wenhai had never returned to Baoding. This time, Li Wenhai had come to visit specifically because he was passing through Baoding on his way to handle some business in Qinzhou, Hunan. The two brothers had not seen each other for many years, so they appeared particularly affectionate upon meeting. After exchanging pleasantries, Zhou Fugui invited Li Wenhai into the house and had some simple seats arranged in the living room. Then, with a look of apology, he said to Li Wenhai, "Dear brother, you've come from afar, and I should have entertained you properly. But I must tell you the truth, just yesterday, my concubine passed away, and we haven't yet handled the funeral arrangements. So please forgive the simple tea and water, and stay here for a few more days. Once the funeral is over the day after tomorrow, I will properly entertain you." In fact, as soon as Li Wenhai entered the mansion, he saw white mourning banners and mourning clothes worn by the household servants everywhere, so he already knew that there must be a funeral in the Zhou family. He blamed himself for coming at such an inopportune time. It was only at this moment, upon hearing Zhou Fugui's words, that he learned it was actually Zhou Fugui's concubine who had unfortunately passed away. He knew that Zhou Fugui had a total of 6 wives, and this 4th sister-in-law was the 4th wife, not yet 30 years old. He couldn't help but be curious as to how such a young wife suddenly fell ill and passed away. So he asked, "I wonder what illness the 4th sister-in-law had." Zhou Fugui's face changed momentarily upon hearing this, but he quickly regained his composure, shook his head, and said with effort, "Ah, this matter is a long story, I'd rather not bring it up again to avoid sadness." Seeing his somewhat melancholic expression, Li Wenhai feared that further questioning might stir up his sorrow, so he nodded and said no more, sitting down to eat. He had been on the road all day and his stomach had been growling with hunger, and the Zhou family's chef was truly remarkable. Although it was only vegetarian dishes, each dish was exquisitely delicious. Therefore, he devoured the food eagerly and soon finished every last bit. After Li Wenhai finished eating, Zhou Fugui had someone take him to a clean guest room to rest. Li Wenhai was extremely exhausted and after quickly washing his face, he laid down and fell asleep, entering dreamland in no time. Unexpectedly, he was awakened in the middle of the night by a strange sound. Opening his eyes and listening carefully, it seemed like someone was sobbing softly in the room. Li Wenhai was startled and immediately opened his eyes wide, but there was no one in the room, only the cold moonlight streaming in through the window. He strained his ears to listen, but apart from his own breathing, the room was silent. He recalled the earlier sobbing, feeling like it was lingering, sending shivers down his spine. Li Wenhai was filled with uncertainty and suspicion, thinking that perhaps he had only had a terrible dream. He turned over, preparing to go back to sleep. However, just as he closed his eyes, the strange sound rang out again, this time sounding more like the groans of a seriously ill patient. Li Wenhai was greatly frightened, immediately sitting up and getting out of bed to look around, trying to find the source of the sound. When he listened at the wall, he found that the sound seemed to be coming from within the wall. Shaking all over and with a pale face, he stared at the wall and slowly turned around. Suddenly, he jumped back onto the bed, covering his head with the blanket, trembling uncontrollably. The sound he heard came and went, causing him extreme anguish. In the darkness, he felt as if there were eyes staring at him, making him feel suffocated, yet he dared not open his eyes, fearing to see something dreadful. After what seemed like an eternity, the strange sound outside gradually grew fainter and eventually disappeared, leaving the surroundings quiet once more. Li Wenhai breathed a sigh of relief, slowly peering out from under the covers, attempting to open his eyes. However, when he did, he saw a pair of crimson eyes above him, with abnormally tiny black pupils exuding an aura of evil and terror. Li Wenhai screamed in terror, sitting up, but the red light flashed and then disappeared. Li Wenhai was drenched in sweat, trembling uncontrollably, and had not closed his eyes all night. It wasn't until the sky gradually lightened and the roosters crowed that he began to calm down. He hastily dressed and asked a servant to take him to see Zhou Fugui, wanting to recount to him everything that had happened the previous night. However, when he arrived at the main hall, the servant told him that Master Zhou was performing a ritual and asked him to wait in the side hall. Li Wenhai had no choice but to sit there, drinking tea and waiting. After a short while, Zhou Fugui walked out slowly, and upon seeing Li Wenhai, he asked in surprise, "Younger brother, why do you look so awful? Did you not rest well last night?" Li Wenhai was filled with fear, but unable to conceal it, he could only force a bitter smile and said, "I am truly grateful for your care, elder brother. It's just that something strange happened last night." Here, he hesitated several times. Seeing him like this, Zhou Fugui was somewhat surprised and hurriedly asked, "Younger brother, what's the matter? Is it because I did not entertain you properly, or did my servants offend you in some way?" Li Wenhai quickly waved his hand and said, "Not at all, it's not like that at all. It's just that something strange happened last night, which kept me from sleeping all night, so I appear so weary." He then truthfully recounted his experience from the previous night to Zhou Fugui. After listening, Zhou Fugui's expression changed for a moment. After pondering for a while, he murmured to himself, "I can't believe such a thing happened." Then he said to Li Wenhai, "Please wait for a moment, I'll be right back." With that, he turned and entered the hall. Li Wenhai, feeling puzzled, could only wait in place. Before long, Zhou Fugui emerged again, smiling, and said to him, "I just consulted a divination, and the omen is very auspicious. It seems that my dear brother has encountered great fortune this time, and will surely become wealthy and prosperous in the future." Li Wenhai was baffled and asked, "Where did the divination come from?" Zhou Fugui replied solemnly, "This is the protective deity of our family and home. My dear brother may not be aware of it." Li Wenhai was even more confused, but could only nod in agreement. Zhou Fugui continued, "Stay with me for a few more days, and perhaps you will receive some good luck. It's been a long time since you last visited Baoding, so you can take a stroll today. I have some funeral matters to attend to, so I won't be able to accompany you." Li Wenhai felt somewhat uneasy, but also thought it wouldn't hurt to go out for a walk, so he agreed. Zhou Fugui then had someone bring out 100 taels of silver notes for him as pocket money. Li Wenhai tried to decline, but had to accept and thanked Zhou Fugui before leaving. By this time, the sun had risen to the middle of the sky, the shops on the street had opened, and the number of pedestrians had gradually increased. He walked slowly, feeling deeply moved, and found that the place was quite different from his childhood memories. Unconsciously, he arrived at the noodle shop where he had asked for directions the night before, and saw the old man wiping tables inside. Thinking back to the old man's words from yesterday, he couldn't help but be moved, so he went in, found a table, and sat down. The old man rushed forward to greet the guest when he saw him. When he saw that it was Li Wenhai, he couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, then smiled and said, "Have you found the Zhou mansion, sir?" Li Wenhai cupped his hands and said, "Yes, thanks to the old man's guidance, I am here today to express my gratitude." Then he took out some silver and placed it on the table, saying, "This is a small token of my appreciation, please accept it, old man." The old man smiled and waved his hand, saying, "It's a small matter, you don't have to worry about it." Li Wenhai insisted on letting the old man take it, and the old man had no choice but to accept it. Li Wenhai then asked, "When we parted yesterday, the old man mentioned that it was difficult to find relatives, what did you mean by that?" The old man stopped smiling after hearing this and hesitated for a long time before saying, "Since the guest has asked, I will not say anything more." He then asked, "Did you see any mourning at the Zhou mansion last night?" Li Wenhai nodded and said, "Yes, my fourth sister-in-law unfortunately passed away a few days ago." The old man sighed and said, "To tell you the truth, this is already the 6th funeral in the Zhou mansion this year." Li Wenhai was greatly surprised and asked, "6 people have already died this year?" The old man said, "Yes. 6 people have already died since the first month, so everyone in the city is saying that their family is very unlucky." Li Wenhai was shocked and asked, "Why?" The old man said, "If it was the elderly or the weak who died of illness or accident, it might not be surprising. But the strange thing is that these 6 people, men and women, masters and servants, all under the age of 30, were in good health, but suddenly died overnight. That's what's strange." Li Wenhai's face turned pale, and he muttered to himself, "Is there such a thing?" Then he asked, "With such strange things happening, did the government not go to investigate the bodies?" The old man said, "The families of the deceased were naturally worried, so they would have the bodies examined. However, apart from the fact that each body was pale, there were no other abnormalities, so nothing could be found out." Li Wenhai was silent for a moment, then said, "This matter is indeed very strange." The old man suddenly leaned closer and whispered to Li Wenhai, "I believe you are a kind-hearted person, so I must advise you to leave the Zhou family as soon as possible to avoid disaster. I also heard that the Zhou family might be haunted by evil spirits." Li Wenhai frowned and said, "Who said that?" The old man said, "A few days ago, Shenming Daoran, the head of Mingyue Temple, came to my shop and mentioned this matter by chance. He said that the Zhou family might be haunted by evil spirits, but when I wanted to ask more, he shook his head and said nothing, only that it was unspeakable." Later, after the news spread, the people of Baoding Prefecture stayed away from the Zhou family, fearing that they would be caught in the disaster. Li Wenhai was silent for a moment and asked, "This concerns my relatives, I don't want to leave easily. I want to ask Shenming Daoran, but I don't know where Mingyue Temple is." The old man said, "It's 3 miles east of the city." Li Wenhai thanked the old man and left the city gate. Sure enough, he saw an inconspicuous Taoist temple not far away, with the words, "Mingyue Temple," written on the door in large characters. He walked straight in and saw a black-clothed old Taoist priest in his 40s meditating, with a young Taoist boy standing beside him. He guessed that the old Taoist priest should be Shenming Daoran, and immediately bowed to him and said, "My name is Li Wenhai, I have met Shenming Daoran." The old Taoist priest heard the voice, opened his eyes, and said with a smile, "You are really lucky." Li Wenhai said in surprise, "The Taoist priest is too kind. I am here for the Zhou family's business." Shenming Daoran said slowly, "I already know your purpose. The Zhou family may have demons, but the rich are often unkind, which is also the arrangement of heaven. Besides, I don't want to kill too much, so you should go back. You did good deeds in your previous life, and you will be blessed in this life, which is not included in these." Li Wenhai was greatly shocked to hear that there might be demons at Zhou Mansion. He urgently sought help from Master Shenming. "Master, what exactly is this demon, and do you have a way to save us?" Master Shenming calmly replied, "This is not something you should know." Anxious, Li Wenhai exclaimed, "How can I stand by when my loved ones are in danger? Please, Master, lend a hand and save my brother's family." With that, he knelt before Master Shenming. Master Shenming closed his eyes as if deep in thought, seemingly ignoring him. Despite Li Wenhai's continuous pleas and bowing, it was only after a long while that Master Shenming opened his eyes and said, "You are a person of compassion and righteousness. Very well, for your sake, I will make an exception and accompany you, but I fear your brother may not have awakened from his dream yet." Li Wenhai was overjoyed upon hearing this but also puzzled. Why did everyone in Baoding Prefecture know about the demons at the Zhou family, yet his brother remained oblivious? Could he be under the influence of the demon? However, at that moment, he had no time to dwell on these thoughts, only expressing his gratitude repeatedly. Master Shenming turned to the young disciple and instructed, "Bring the skyward bowl and demon sealing sword. We will go to Zhou Mansion with Li Wenhai." The young disciple respectfully complied, fetched a large black package from the backyard, and then Li Wenhai led the way with the two of them following closely behind, heading towards Zhou Mansion. Before long, the three arrived at the entrance of the Zhou Mansion and saw Zhou Fugui standing there, his face grim and silent. Li Wenhai was puzzled and about to speak when Zhou Fugui waved his hand. More than 10 servants immediately came out and lined up at the entrance, seemingly trying to keep them out. Zhou Fugui looked at Li Wenhai and slowly said, "My dear brother, I have been good to you. Why are you treating me like this?" Li Wenhai was greatly shocked and quickly said, "Elder brother, how can you say that?" Zhou Fugui pointed at the Taoist priest Shenming behind Li Wenhai and said loudly, "Is this sorcerer the one you brought to harm me?" Shenming remained expressionless and silent. Li Wenhai smiled and said, "Elder brother, you have misunderstood. This Taoist priest was specially invited by me to dispel disasters for your family." Zhou Fugui glared and said, "Stop talking nonsense. There is no disaster in my house." Li Wenhai approached and whispered, "I've already told you about the strange events last night, but you didn't take it seriously. Instead, you said it was a good omen. I felt uneasy about it. Later, I heard people on the street saying that 6 people from your family have died this year, and each death was very strange. Don't you find these things eerie? This Taoist priest Shenming is here to dispel disasters for your family. Why not let him in to take a look first? If everything is normal, then all the better." Zhou Fugui said, "Who is talking nonsense over there? Life and death are predetermined for everyone. These 6 individuals have simply reached the end of their lives after enjoying good fortune. In any ordinary household, it's not uncommon for someone to pass away. Our Zhou family has many members, these occurrences are just coincidental. Don't believe these rumors." Li Wenhai was about to step forward to persuade when the Zen master behind them approached and greeted Zhou respectfully, saying, "Master Zhou, please don't worry. I am here to pay respects to the celestial being. Could you please accommodate us?" Zhou Fugui's expression changed drastically upon hearing this. He stared at the Zen master before responding, "How do you know there is a celestial being protecting our residence?" The Zen master smiled faintly and replied, "I have my ways of knowing." Zhou Fugui sternly stated, "No. The celestial being just warned me that a demon is coming to our residence, and I believe that demon is you. You absolutely cannot enter." The Zen master muttered to himself, "This is what they call being obstinate." Seeing this situation, Li Wenhai became very anxious. He noticed the perplexed expressions on the faces of the servants standing by and urgently said to them, "Don't you realize a great disaster is about to befall us?" These dozen or so servants already harbored doubts about the affairs of the Zhou residence. Witnessing 6 deaths within a year and hearing about a demon in the residence, they were extremely worried, fearing they might also be implicated. They lived in constant fear, dreading becoming the next victim. Seeing Li Wenhai bringing the Zen master to the Zhou residence, they felt a glimmer of hope, but Zhou Fugui ordered them to block Li Wenhai and the Zen master at the entrance. They were torn. Although they wished to let Li Wenhai and the Zen master in, disobeying the master's orders was a grave offense. They were caught in a dilemma, hesitating. After a brief stalemate, a bold servant whispered to Zhou Fugui, "Sir, I find things in the mansion rather peculiar. Why not let this Taoist priest take a look inside?" Enraged, Zhou Fugui exploded, "Are you slaves trying to rebel against your master? I'd like to see who dares." Seeing the situation, Li Wenhai was helpless. Suddenly, Shenming stepped forward, shook his head, and said, "Can a dying man still be saved?" With a swift gesture, Zhou Fugui felt dizzy, closed his eyes, and lost consciousness. Witnessing this, Li Wenhai was shocked, but Shenming calmly said, "It's all right, just let him rest in the room for 2 hours." Li Wenhai hurriedly instructed the servants to take Zhou back to his room to rest. Later, Shenming asked to be taken to the room where Li had stayed the previous night. Leading the way, Li Wenhai and Shenming arrived at the room quickly. Pushing the door open gently, they found the room unchanged from the day before, with no abnormalities. Inside, Shenming looked around and asked, "Did you hear the sound in this room last night?" Li Wenhai confirmed, "Yes, it seemed to come from this wall." Pointing to the east wall, he shuddered at the memory of the previous night. Placing his hand on the wall, Shenming closed his eyes in silence. After a moment, he opened his eyes and confirmed Li's suspicions. Carefully, Li asked, "Master, what is peculiar about this wall?" Without answering, Shenming instructed, "Bring me the bowl from the package." A young servant outside handed over a dark bowl and a worn-out green sword. Taking the bowl, Shenming dismissed the servant, asking Li to stay and assist him. Perplexed, Li, a mere scholar without spiritual practices, questioned how he could help. Shenming reassured him, explaining the unique abilities of the items and the protective forces around him, persuading Li to stay and assist. Shenming took out a red pen and a yellow talisman from his sleeve, stuck it on the east wall, sat facing the wall with his legs crossed, and gestured for Li Wenhai to sit next to him. He said to Li, "Hold the offering bowl in your palm and do not be afraid no matter what you see. With me here, I will keep you safe." Li Wenhai, feeling anxious, followed his instructions and raised the offering bowl. Shenming closed his eyes and chanted a spell. Strangely, before he finished chanting, they heard crackling and faint laughter coming from the wall, similar to what Li Wenhai had heard the night before. In a state of shock, Li Wenhai looked at the wall in front of him and saw it slowly expanding, as if something was continuously hitting it, causing the wall to peel off. However, Shenming seemed completely indifferent to everything in front of him as he continued to chant. In the midst of Li Wenhai's horror, they heard several booming sounds, and a fist-sized hole appeared in the wall, from which a pale, bony hand emerged, with long, white, fleshless fingers that made Li Wenhai shudder. As the cracks on the wall increased and the bricks near the hole seemed about to fall, he sat on the ground panting heavily, feeling completely lost and confused. At that moment, Shenming made several strokes in the offering bowl with 3 fingers, and suddenly a fiery ball the size of an egg appeared, emitting a blazing light. Li Wenhai felt the fireball in his palm but did not feel any heat, which amazed him. Suddenly, a large hole broke open in the wall in front of them, and a skeleton jumped out, its entire body snow-white with 2 bright red eye sockets staring fiercely at him, looking terrifying. The skeleton leaped out of the wall, trying to pounce forward but seemed to be deterred as if burnt, hesitating to approach. It circled around Li Wenhai and Shenming, causing Li Wenhai to sweat profusely in fear. Shenming closed his eyes and recited a mantra. Suddenly, they heard cracking sounds coming from the wall accompanied by laughter. Li Wenhai stared in horror as a section of the wall slowly expanded as if something was hitting it, causing the wall to peel off. Shenming continued chanting, seemingly unperturbed. Suddenly, a fireball soared up, illuminating brightly as the wall burst open, revealing a skeleton jumping out with a snow-white skeletal frame and fiery red eyes glaring fiercely. The skeleton attempted to approach but hesitated, seeming to be repelled as if burnt, only circling around Li Wenhai and Shenming. Li Wenhai was terrified while Shenming chanted more urgently, causing the fireball to rise. Eventually, the skeleton collapsed, and the fireball vanished. Shenming inverted a bowl over the skeleton's head, claiming to have captured its spirit, instructing Li Wenhai to take him to the place of worship in the hall. Despite feeling perplexed, Li Wenhai followed Shenming to a chamber where they found a shrine with a plaque inscribed with 7 large characters, guardian deity of the household. Standing behind Li Wenhai, Shenming pointed at the shrine and revealed that the calamity stemmed from there. He then brandished a demon-sealing sword, emitting a blue light that revealed a blood-red snake over a foot long dripping with fresh blood, its eyes filled with malice. Shenming identified the snake as the guardian deity of the Zhou family, known for its vicious nature of feeding on human blood, linking it to the deaths of 6 members of the Zhou family. Shenming suggested that aside from the recently discovered skeleton and the unburied body, the other 4 bodies were likely not in their coffins but within the walls of other rooms. Li Wenhai couldn't help but take a sharp breath after hearing it, quickly bowing to Shenming, "Please, Taoist, do your best to eliminate the evil and save my brother's family from disaster." Shenming smiled and said, "No need for many words, let me get rid of this demon first, and then we'll remove the remaining bones." With a sword in hand, Shenming pointed at the red snake, and its head fell off, wriggled a few times on the ground, then lay still. "Take a few servants and bring shovels, follow me," Shenming instructed. Li Wenhai went out to command a few servants to bring tools and followed Shenming to the courtyard. After inspecting around, Shenming pointed out 4 rooms and ordered the servants to dig open the east wall. Li Wenhai was still fearful of skeletons harming people, but Shenming reassured, "No need to worry, skeletons are just puppets. With the mastermind gone, they are harmless and should be reburied as soon as possible." The servants broke the walls and unearthed 4 skeletons. Zhou Fugui had woken up, furious and cursing in bed. Li Wenhai informed him of the recent events, but Zhou Fugui remained skeptical. Li Wenhai had the servants bring the dead red snake, and upon seeing it, Zhou Fugui turned pale and speechless. When asked about the origin of the celestial being, Zhou Fugui recounted an incident where a red snake appeared in his room, claiming to be the household guardian deity. Despite his initial disbelief, the snake vanished after being prayed to by Zhou Fugui. After hearing these stories, Zhou Fugui couldn't help but gasp in astonishment. Recalling his own past experiences, he felt amazed. One night, he had a strange dream where a man in red claimed to be the guardian deity of the Zhou family, informing him about the fluctuations in cloth prices which led him to make a fortune. Following this, Zhou's business flourished, but a series of unfortunate events made him skeptical. Worried about the deaths in his family, he prayed fervently in front of the deity's tablet. In another dream, the deity advised him not to doubt too much but also warned him that someone with evil intentions would come to cause trouble. He was instructed not to let them into his house, or else his family's fortune would be ruined. Panicked by the dream, Zhou Fugui woke up and desperately stopped the intruders. Only when Master Shenming arrived did he realize the truth, feeling grateful and fearful. Despite missing Master Shenming's departure, Zhou Fugui sent generous gifts to Mingyue Temple as a token of gratitude. That night, he expressed his gratitude to Li Wenhai by hosting a feast. The next day, Li Wenhai packed his bags and left, with Zhou Fugui seeing him off outside the city with reluctance. From then on, Zhou Fugui devoted himself to goodness, becoming renowned for his wealth and benevolence in Baoding. Li Wenhai, on the other hand, passed the imperial examination years later, rising to the rank of 3rd-grade official and living a healthy life until the age of 90.